Sometimes the person who saves your life ends up saving so much more than that. In the winter of 1882, a young schoolteacher named Sarah Hartwell collapsed in a Montana blizzard, certain she would die alone in the snow. The mountain man who found her had spent 5 years avoiding people, nursing grief he thought would never heal. Jacob Brennan carried her to his cabin and brought her back from the edge of death. For days, the storm kept them isolated together. In those quiet hours, something grew between them that neither expected. Then, her family arrived, wealthy, powerful, determined to take her home. Would she return to the life waiting for her back east, or choose the man who'd shown her a different kind of living? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The mountains didn't care about a man's grief. They didn't soften their winds or gentle their winters for a broken heart. That's what Jacob Brennan liked about them. He stood at the entrance of his cabin as dawn broke over the ridgeline, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of gold and pale rose. The air bit at his lungs with each breath, sharp and clean. 5 years he'd been living up here. 5 years since he'd walked away from everything that reminded him of loss. The cabin sat in a small valley, tucked against the mountainside, where the pine trees grew thick enough to break the worst of the wind. He'd built it himself that first desperate summer, working until his hands bled and his back screamed, grateful for the pain that let him sleep at night without dreaming. The leather cord around his neck shifted as he moved, and his hand went to it automatically, feeling the weight of the gold band that hung there. He'd never been able to take it off that leather strip, never been able to put it away in a drawer where he couldn't feel it. Some mornings he told himself he'd remove it, start fresh. Most mornings he didn't even try. Jacob pulled on his heavy coat, the one he'd traded 3 prime beaver pelts for 2 winters back. The fur lining still held its warmth. He shouldered his rifle and stepped out into the cold, his boots crunching through the crusted snow. The trapline needed checking. Winter was the best season for pelts, when the animals grew their thickest coats. He'd learned the rhythm of this life: set traps, check them, skin what he caught, cure the hides, take them down to Ezra's trading post once a month. It was simple. It was solitary. It was exactly what he needed. The first trap was empty. The second held a marten with a coat like dark chocolate. Jacob worked quickly, his movements efficient from years of practice. He reset the trap and moved on, working his way through the line. By midday he had 4 good pelts and was ready to head back. The sky had changed while he worked, clouds moving in from the northwest. Heavy clouds, the kind that meant snow. He knew these mountains well enough now to read their moods. This wasn't just a dusting coming, this was going to be serious. Back at the cabin, he stored the pelts and checked his supplies. Firewood stacked against the wall, smoked meat hanging from the rafters, flour and coffee in sealed tins. He was set for weeks, if he needed to be. But the trading post Ezra would be expecting him. It had been 3 weeks since his last visit, and the old man worried if Jacob went too long without showing up. More than that, Jacob had promised to bring down his accumulated pelts before the heavy snows came. He debated with himself for a moment, studying the darkening sky. He could wait it out, go down after the storm passed. But something in him resisted the idea of being trapped up here, even by choice. Maybe it was the restlessness that sometimes crept in during the long winters. Maybe it was just knowing that Ezra kept a bottle of decent whiskey under his counter and would share a glass while they tallied up the trade. Jacob packed his pelts into a large canvas sack, secured his cabin, and started down the mountain trail. The wind was already picking up, pushing against him as he descended. The trail to the trading post took 3 hours in good weather. He'd need to move fast. The trading post sat at a crossroads of sorts, not a town, barely even a settlement, just Ezra's log building and a barn where travelers could shelter their horses. But it was the only outpost for 50 miles in any direction, and Ezra had been running it for near 20 years. He knew everyone who passed through, remembered every face, every story. Jacob emerged from the tree line an hour before dusk. The snow had started, light flakes that swirled in the wind. He could see smoke rising from the trading post's chimney, and the sight brought a small measure of comfort he wouldn't have admitted to anyone. He pushed through the door, stomping snow from his boots. The interior was warm, heated by a potbelly stove that glowed red. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with everything from ammunition to canned peaches. The smell of coffee and tobacco smoke filled the air. Jacob Brennan? About time. Ezra looked up from behind his counter, his weathered face breaking into a grin. He was past 60, with a grey beard that reached his chest and eyes that had seen every kind of hard luck the frontier could offer. Thought maybe you decided to winter up there without coming down at all. Promised I'd bring these before the storms hit. Jacob dropped his pack on the counter. Looks like I just made it. Ezra opened the sack and whistled low. Fine pelts. Real fine. You've got the touch. I'll give you that. He began laying them out, examining each one with practiced hands. Martin, Fisher, couple of Fox. This'll trade well. They fell into the familiar ritual of tallying and negotiating. Jacob never pushed hard on price, he didn't need much, and Ezra was fair. When they finished, Ezra poured 2 glasses of whiskey from the bottle he kept hidden. Storm's going to be bad, Ezra said, settling onto a stool. Got that feel to it. I noticed. You staying down here tonight? Got space in the back. Jacob considered it. The wind was howling now, rattling the windows. Might be wise. More than wise. I've seen blizzards like this kill men who thought they knew better. Ezra took a sip of his whiskey. Besides, could use the company. Gets quiet this time of year. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the snow begin to fall harder outside the window. This was as close to friendship as Jacob allowed himself these days, occasional conversations with a man who didn't pry, didn't ask about the past, didn't try to fill every silence with empty words. Had a woman come through here 2 days ago, Ezra said eventually. Young thing, traveling alone. Teacher, she said. Heading to that new settlement school up past Copper Ridge. Jacob said nothing, but something in him tensed slightly. Told her she should wait, that weather was turning. But she was determined, said she'd already delayed her start by 2 weeks and couldn't afford to wait longer. Ezra shook his head. She had good gear at least, and she knew how to ride. Still, I didn't like it. Didn't like it at all. She make it through? Don't know. Haven't heard. Settlement's 3 days' ride in good weather. Ezra stared into his glass. This storm came up faster than I expected. If she got caught in it, he didn't finish the thought. Jacob felt an uncomfortable stirring in his chest, something he'd tried to bury for 5 years. Concern for another person. The urge to do something, to help. He pushed it down, took a drink of his whiskey. Nothing to be done now, he said. No, Ezra agreed. Nothing to be done. But as Jacob settled into the small back room that night, listening to the wind scream around the building and the snow hammer against the walls, he couldn't quite shake the image of someone alone out there in the dark, the cold slowly stealing the life from their body. He touched the ring hanging around his neck and closed his eyes, trying not to remember another time, another death he'd been helpless to prevent. The mountains didn't care about a man's grief. But sometimes, whether he wanted it to or not, grief still cared about the mountains and everything that happened in them. The storm raged through the night with a fury that shook the trading post's walls. Jacob woke before dawn, the howling wind a constant roar that made sleep impossible. He dressed in the dark and made his way to the main room where Ezra was already stoking the fire. Hell of a storm, the old man said without turning around. Worst I've seen in 3 years. Jacob moved to the window and wiped away the frost that had formed on the inside of the glass. Nothing but white. The snow was coming down so thick he couldn't see the barn 20 feet away. How long you think it'll last? Day? Maybe two. Hard to say. Ezra poured coffee from a pot that had been sitting on the stove. Nobody's going anywhere until it breaks. They spent the morning in quiet routine, Ezra tending to his accounts while Jacob repaired a bridle that had been hanging on a hook. The wind never let up, shrieking around the corners of the building like something alive and angry. By noon, the drifts against the door had piled waist-high. It was mid-afternoon when they heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the storm, a faint, irregular thumping against the door. Ezra and Jacob exchanged glances. The old man reached for his rifle while Jacob moved to the entrance. The thumping came again, weaker this time. Jacob pulled the door open against the resistance of the snow. The wind hit him like a fist, stealing his breath. At first he saw nothing but white. Then he looked down. A figure lay crumpled against the doorframe, so covered in snow it was barely recognizable as human. One arm was raised, frozen in the act of knocking. Jacob dropped to his knees, his heart suddenly pounding. "Ezra, help me!" Together they pulled the figure inside, snow cascading off the body as they moved it. Jacob brushed away the snow from the face and felt his chest tighten. A woman, young, her lips blue, her skin pale as death. Her eyes were closed, ice crystals clinging to her lashes. "God in heaven," Ezra breathed. "It's her." The teacher. Jacob was already working, pulling off her frozen outer garments with hands that knew what needed to be done but hadn't done it in years. Her coat was stiff with ice. Underneath, her dress was soaked through. She wasn't moving, wasn't making a sound. "Get blankets," Jacob ordered, "and warm water. Not hot, warm." Ezra moved quickly despite his age. Jacob continued stripping away the wet clothes, his mind falling into a pattern he'd hoped never to use again. He'd seen frostbite before, hypothermia, the slow death that came from cold. He'd watched it take Emma during that terrible night when the midwife couldn't come through the snow and the bleeding wouldn't stop and the cold crept into their cabin no matter how high he built the fire. He pushed the memory away. Focus. This woman was still breathing, shallow and slow, but breathing. "Is she alive?" Ezra asked, returning with an armful of blankets and a basin of water. "Barely." Jacob wrapped her in the blankets, then began the careful work of warming her extremities. Her hands were the worst fingers, white and stiff. Her feet weren't much better. He'd seen men lose toes and fingers to frostbite. He'd seen them lose more than that. "How long was she out there?" Jacob asked. "Can't say. Could have been hours. Could have been since last night." Ezra's face was grave. "How did she even find her way here in this?" Jacob didn't answer. He was checking her pulse, feeling the slow, irregular beat. Her breathing was too shallow. She needed warmth, real warmth, not just blankets. She needed to be somewhere he could monitor her through the night. He made a decision he knew he'd regret. "I'm taking her up to my cabin." Ezra stared at him. "Jacob, you can't. Not in this storm. It's 3 hours in good weather. I know the trail blindfolded, and she needs more than what we've got here." He was already moving, gathering supplies. "You've got no bed, no privacy, no way to tend to her properly. I've got all of that. You'll both die out there. I've walked that trail in worse." It wasn't quite true, but it was close enough. "I can't stay here, Ezra. You know I can't." The old man studied him for a long moment, understanding dawning in his eyes. The small room, the lack of space, the constant presence of another person. It would be unbearable for Jacob, who'd chosen isolation for a reason. But more than that, Ezra seemed to recognize something else in Jacob's face. A need, perhaps, to do this thing. To save a life after failing to save the one that mattered most. "Then God go with you," Ezra said quietly. "Take whatever you need." Jacob moved with purpose, packing supplies into his satchel. Food, medical supplies, extra blankets. He fashioned a sling from rope and canvas that would let him carry the woman on his back. She was small. Slight it would be hard, but possible. What's her name? Jacob asked as he worked. Sarah Hartwell. That's what she told me. Ezra was helping now, securing the supplies. She had a satchel, papers, personal things. It's over there. Jacob retrieved the leather satchel from where it sat near the door, still dusted with snow. He didn't look inside, that would be an intrusion, and the woman deserved her privacy, but he tied it to his pack. If she lived, she'd want her things. When everything was ready, he carefully lifted Sarah Hartwell and positioned her in the sling on his back. She weighed almost nothing. Or perhaps that was just his fear making her seem insubstantial. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and he could feel the frightening chill of her skin, even through the layers of blankets. "You're a damn fool, Jacob Brennan," Ezra said, but his voice was gentle. "Wouldn't be the first time." Jacob pulled his hat down low, adjusted the straps of the sling, and stepped out into the storm. The wind hit him immediately, trying to push him back. The snow was blinding, a wall of white that turned the world into nothing but cold and noise. He knew if he hesitated, if he thought too much about what he was doing, he'd never leave. So he walked. The first hour was the hardest. The trail climbed steadily, and with the extra weight on his back, every step was an effort. The snow had drifted across the path in places, forcing him to break through thigh-deep powder. The wind drove ice crystals into his face like tiny needles. More than once he had to stop and check his bearings, making sure he hadn't wandered off the trail in the whiteout conditions. He talked to her as he walked, though he knew she couldn't hear him. "Stay with me now. Not much farther. You just hold on." The words were as much for him as for her, a way to keep moving when his legs screamed for rest. The second hour, his feet began to go numb. He couldn't feel his face anymore. The woman on his back was a dead weight, and he had to keep checking to make sure she was still breathing, had to keep adjusting the blankets to protect her from the wind. His mind began to play tricks on him, showing him Emma's face in the snow, hearing her voice in the storm. The third hour, he nearly gave up. His legs buckled twice, sending him to his knees in the deep snow. Each time he got back up was harder than the last. The cabin should have been close, but nothing looked familiar. Had he missed it? Passed it somehow in the blinding snow? Then, like a miracle, he saw the dark shape of the cabin wall through the white. He staggered the last few yards, fumbled with frozen fingers to open the door, and fell inside with Sarah still strapped to his back. The cabin was cold, dark, but it was shelter. Jacob forced himself to move, to light the lamp with shaking hands, to get the fire started in the stone fireplace. Only when flames were crackling and spreading warmth through the room did he carefully remove Sarah from the sling and lay her near the fire. She was still alive. He could see the faint rise and fall of her chest beneath the blankets, but her color was worse than before, her lips nearly grey. He had hours of work ahead of him if she was going to survive the night. Jacob stripped off his own wet outer clothes and got to work. He warmed water, prepared warm compresses for her hands and feet, checked her pulse every few minutes. He'd done this before. Sitting vigil through a long night, watching someone he cared about slip away despite everything he did. But this time, he told himself, would be different. This time he'd be enough. The night stretched ahead of him, and Jacob Brennan settled in beside the fire with a woman whose name he barely knew, determined not to let death claim another life in the cold Montana winter. The morning Sarah found the daguerreotype, the sun was actually shining through the cabin windows for the first time in days. Jacob had gone out early to check his trapline, leaving her alone in the cabin with instructions to rest and not overdo it. But Sarah was tired of resting. Her strength had returned enough that sitting idle felt more exhausting than being useful. She decided to tidy the cabin a small way to repay Jacob's kindness and care. She was cleaning the simple shelf that served as his pantry when she accidentally knocked over a small wooden box. The lid came off as it hit the floor, and several items spilled out. Sarah knelt to gather them up and found herself holding a tin daguerreotype in a leather case. She knew she shouldn't look. It was private, personal, but her hand opened the case, before her conscience could stop her. The woman in the photograph was beautiful, young with dark hair swept back from a gentle face and eyes that seemed to smile even in the formal portrait. She wore a simple dress with lace at the collar, and her hand rested on the shoulder of the man beside her. Jacob, younger, clean-shaven, with an expression Sarah had never seen on his face. Joy, pure, uncomplicated joy. "Emma," Sarah whispered. This was the woman he'd loved, the wife whose death had sent him running to these mountains. "Didn't give you permission to go through my things." Sarah jumped, nearly dropping the daguerreotype. Jacob stood in the doorway, snow on his boots, his face carefully blank, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened. "I'm sorry. I was cleaning, and I knocked over the box. I shouldn't have looked." She stood quickly, holding the case out to him. "I'm truly sorry." Jacob crossed the room and took the daguerreotype from her hands. He stared at it for a long moment, his thumb tracing the edge of the frame. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "Wedding day. 5 years ago. Thought we had our whole lives ahead of us." He closed the case with a soft snap. "Turned out, we had 3 years." "What happened?" Sarah asked gently. "You don't have to tell me, but sometimes it helps to speak about the people we've lost." Jacob moved to the table and sat down heavily, still holding the daguerreotype. After a long silence, he began to talk. "She got pregnant. We were so happy. Scared too, but mostly happy. We'd wanted children, talked about having a whole houseful." His voice was steady, but Sarah could hear the pain underneath. "Everything seemed fine at first. Emma was strong, healthy. Then one night, middle of winter, the baby decided to come early." Sarah sat down across from him, saying nothing, just listening. "I rode for the midwife, but there was a storm. Not as bad as the one you got caught in, but bad enough. By the time I got back, Emma was—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "There was too much blood. The baby was breech. The midwife did what she could, but it wasn't enough. I held Emma's hand and watched her die, along with our son. Took most of the night. She kept apologizing, saying she was sorry, like it was her fault. Oh, Jacob," Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I buried them both on a hill overlooking the ranch, built a fence around the graves, planted wildflowers Emma had loved. Then I sold everything and left. Couldn't stand being there without her, couldn't stand people's pity and sympathy and all their kind words that didn't change a damn thing." He set the daguerreotype on the table between them, staring at Emma's young, happy face. "Up here, nobody expects anything from me. Nobody tries to fix me or tell me it'll get better with time. The mountains don't care if I'm grieving or angry or just trying to get through another day. They just are, and I can just be, and that's enough." "Except it's not, is it?" Sarah said softly. "Being enough, I mean. You're still carrying her with you everywhere you go." She gestured to the cord around his neck. "You're still holding on." Jacob's hand went to the ring beneath his shirt. "And if I am, what's wrong with that? She was my wife. I loved her. Nothing's wrong with it. But love, real love, doesn't keep us frozen in place. It's supposed to help us grow, to move forward, even when the person we love is gone." Sarah reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of his. "Emma wouldn't want you hiding up here alone, would she? Living half a life because the whole one you planned together isn't possible anymore? You didn't know her. You don't know what she'd want." "You're right. But I know what it's like to run from pain. I know what it's like to choose loneliness because it feels safer than risking your heart again." Sarah pulled her hand back. "I ran from expectations and pressure, from a life that would have slowly suffocated who I really was. You ran from grief and loss. We both ended up alone, telling ourselves it was better this way." Jacob looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his expression cracked. "Is it better? I don't know. I thought it was, but now—" She stopped. not sure how to finish that sentence without revealing too much of what she'd been feeling these past days. "But now," he prompted, "now I'm not so sure loneliness is the same as peace, and I'm not sure running is the same as healing." They sat in silence for a while, the daguerreotype on the table between them like a bridge between past and present, between who they'd been and who they were becoming. Finally, Jacob spoke. "Want to know the worst part? Sometimes I can't remember her face without looking at this picture. 3 years she's been gone, and already her voice is fading from my memory. Soon all I'll have left are these things, this picture, her ring, the ghost of who we were together. And I'm terrified that if I let go, if I stop holding on so tight, I'll lose even that. I'll lose her completely." "You won't," Sarah said with certainty. "Love doesn't work that way. The people who matter to us, who shape who we become, they're written into us. You carry Emma in the way you build things carefully, the way you carve beauty into wood, the way you saved my life without expecting anything in return." Jacob's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "How do you know?" "Because I see it. Because the best parts of her are still alive in you." He reached across the table then and took Sarah's hand in his. His palm was rough, calloused from work, but his grip was gentle. They sat like that, hands clasped, as morning light filled the cabin and the world outside began to thaw. "Thank you," he said finally, "for not being afraid of my grief. Thank you for not being afraid of mine." Something had shifted between them in that moment, something significant. The careful distance they'd maintained had narrowed, and now they were standing in a space where honesty lived, where two wounded people could acknowledge their pain without shame. Jacob released her hand slowly, as if reluctant to break the connection. He picked up the daguerreotype and looked at Emma one more time, then carefully placed it back in the wooden box. "I should get back to work," he said, "and I should finish cleaning up the mess I made." But neither of them moved immediately. They stayed at the table, aware that something important had happened, that they'd crossed a threshold they couldn't uncross. When Jacob finally stood, he paused beside Sarah's chair. His hand touched her shoulder briefly, a gesture of connection and comfort. Then he was moving toward the door, pulling on his coat, heading back out into the cold. Sarah sat alone in the cabin, her shoulder still warm where he'd touched it, and wondered what it meant that she was thinking less about the teaching position waiting for her and more about what it would feel like to stay. 3 days after their conversation about Emma, the weather finally broke for good. The sky cleared to a brilliant blue, and the sun shone so bright on the snow it hurt to look at it. Jacob announced that the trails would be passable in another day or 2. Sarah felt her heart sink at the news, though she knew it should have brought relief. "I'll take you down to the trading post," Jacob said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Ezra can help arrange transport to the settlement from there." "Of course. That makes sense." Sarah forced herself to sound practical, reasonable. "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough." It wasn't an imposition. Jacob was checking his traps, coiling rope with careful precision. "You were welcome here." The words hung between them, weighted with everything they weren't saying. That afternoon, Jacob took Sarah outside to show her the mountain. She'd been trapped indoors for so long, and now the world sparkled with fresh snow under clear skies. He moved through the drifts with easy confidence, breaking trail for her, pointing out landmarks. "That ridge there, see how it cuts across? That's the way down to Ezra's place." He gestured to another direction. "And there, that's where the creek runs. Good fishing in spring." "It's beautiful," Sarah said, and meant it. The mountains stretched endlessly in every direction, wild and magnificent. "I can see why you chose this." "Can you?" He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Most people think I'm crazy, living up here alone. Most people are afraid of silence, afraid of what they might hear if the world got quiet enough." Jacob studied her face. "That I'm not sure I want to leave." The words came out before she could stop them, honest and raw. He went very still. "You have a teaching position waiting. A purpose. That's more than most people have. I know, and I'll go to it, fulfill my commitment. But that doesn't mean—" She stopped, not sure how to finish. Doesn't mean what? Doesn't mean I won't wonder about this, about what might have happened if I'd had more time here. Jacob took a step closer. They were standing in snow up to their knees, the sun warm on their faces despite the cold. "Sarah, I know," she interrupted. "I know you're not ready for anything. I know you're still grieving, Emma, and I'm not asking you to stop. I needed you to know that these days here, they've meant something to me. You've meant something to me." He reached up slowly and touched her face, his rough fingers gentle against her cheek. She leaned into the touch, closing her eyes. "You've meant something to me too," he said quietly. "More than I thought possible. But I don't know if I have anything to offer you. I don't know if I'm capable of—" "I'm not asking for promises, Jacob. I'm just telling you the truth." They stood like that, his hand on her face, her eyes closed, the mountains surrounding them in vast silence. Then Jacob leaned forward and rested his forehead against hers. "I wish things were different," he whispered. "I wish I was different. You're exactly who you need to be." He pulled back then, his hand dropping away, and the moment passed. They walked back to the cabin without talking, both of them aware that time was running out. That evening, Sarah pulled out her silver locket, one of the few personal items she'd had with her on the journey. Inside were small portraits of her parents, painted miniatures from before she'd left Boston. She opened it and stared at their faces, feeling the weight of obligation and love tangled together. "Your family?" Jacob asked, noticing her absorption. "My parents. Father and Mother Hartwell, pillars of Boston society." She spoke without bitterness, just resignation. "They weren't happy about me coming west. My mother cried for a week. My father tried to forbid it, then threatened to cut me off, then finally gave up and bought me the best traveling gear money could buy. They love you, they do, in their way. But their love comes with expectations, with requirements. It always has." She closed the locket. "Sometimes I think about what would happen if I just didn't go back. If I stayed out here, made a life on my own terms. Could you do that? Give up your family completely? I don't know. Could you give up Emma's memory completely?" Jacob smiled sadly. "Touché." They played chess that night, their last game before the journey down. The moves came slowly, neither of them wanting to finish, wanting to draw out these final hours. When Jacob finally checkmated her king, Sarah felt an absurd urge to cry. "Good game," she managed. "You're getting better. Another few months and you'd beat me regularly. Another few months." As if that were possible, as if this wasn't ending tomorrow, Jacob stood and began putting away the pieces, then stopped. He held out the small carved knight he'd made from antler. "Here, take this with you." "Jacob, I can't. Please. So you'll remember this time. So you'll know it was real." Sarah took the chess piece, her fingers closing around it. "I won't forget. Even without this, I won't forget." "I know, but take it anyway." She tucked the knight carefully into her pocket, feeling its weight there like a promise or a question mark. That night, Sarah lay awake in Jacob's bed, her bed for these strange, suspended days, and listened to him moving around in the main room, preparing for tomorrow's journey. She touched the locket at her neck, thought about her parents and their expectations. Then she reached into her pocket and felt the carved knight Jacob had given her. 2 different futures, 2 different lives. One pulling her forward to duty and purpose, the other tempting her to stay in this small cabin with a man who'd showed her what it meant to be seen and valued for exactly who she was. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to imagine what Emma would say if she could speak to her now. Would she tell Sarah to run, to protect her heart? Or would she tell her to stay, to take the risk, to show Jacob that love didn't end just because loss had happened? The answer, Sarah thought, was that Emma would probably tell her to choose whatever made her happiest, and that was the problem. Sarah didn't know anymore what happiness looked like. Tomorrow she would leave these mountains. Tonight, she let herself imagine what it might be like if she didn't have to. They were packing the last of Sarah's belongings when they heard the horses. Jacob froze, his hand going automatically to the rifle mounted above the door. Visitors to his cabin were rare, unheard of in winter. He moved to the window and pulled back the oiled skin that covered it. Riders, 4 of them, coming up the trail. His voice was tight. "Sarah, do you know anyone who might be looking for you?" Sarah's heart began to pound. She joined him at the window and felt the blood drain from her face. Even at this distance, even bundled in winter gear, she recognized the lead rider's posture, the way he sat his horse with absolute authority. "That's my father," she whispered. "That's Cornelius Hartwell." Jacob turned to her, his eyes wide. "Your father came all the way from Boston? He must have been contacted when I didn't arrive at the settlement." "Oh God, Jacob. He's probably been searching for weeks." Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. "You don't understand what this means. He'll think they'll all think." "Think what?" "That something improper happened. That you—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The implications were clear enough. An unmarried woman, stranded alone with a man for weeks. In her parents' world, her reputation would be destroyed. The horses drew closer. Jacob could make out details now: expensive tack, fine coats, hired men who looked like they knew how to handle trouble. The lead rider pulled up in front of the cabin and dismounted with practiced grace. He was tall, silver-haired, with the bearing of a man used to command and the cold eyes of someone who'd made his fortune through steel will and sharp dealing. Jacob opened the door before Hartwell could knock. "Mr. Brennan, I presume?" Hartwell's voice was cultured, clipped. "I'm Cornelius Hartwell. I believe you have my daughter." "Father!" Sarah appeared at Jacob's shoulder, and Hartwell's face transformed. Relief, joy, and something harder all flashed across his features in quick succession. "Sarah, thank God." He started to move forward, then checked himself, his eyes taking in her simple dress, her loose hair, the domestic scene behind her. "Are you all right? Have you been hurt?" "I'm fine. Mr. Brennan saved my life. I was caught in the blizzard and nearly froze, and he brought me here and cared for me until I recovered." One of the other riders dismounted, a younger man with Sarah's eyes and her stubborn chin. "Sarah, we've been searching for 3 weeks. Do you have any idea what we've been through? Mother's been sick with worry." "Thomas." Sarah's voice softened. "I'm sorry. I never meant to cause such trouble." Cornelius Hartwell was looking at Jacob now with eyes that assessed and calculated. "We're grateful for your assistance, Mr. Brennan. I'd like to compensate you for your trouble and for the supplies you've used caring for my daughter. Name your price." Jacob's jaw tightened. "I don't want money for helping someone who needed it." "Nevertheless, I insist." Hartwell pulled a leather wallet from inside his coat. $1,000 should—" "I said I don't want your money." Jacob's voice was flat, hard. "Your daughter was in trouble. I helped her. That's the end of it." The 2 men stared at each other, tension crackling in the cold air. Thomas stepped between them, his hands up in a placating gesture. "Father, let it be. The man doesn't want payment." He turned to Jacob. "We do appreciate what you did. Truly. But we need to get Sarah back to civilization, get her checked by a proper doctor. I've been caring for her frostbite. She's healing well. I'm sure you've done your best," Thomas said, his tone implying that a mountain man's best wasn't quite adequate. "But she needs professional medical attention. A teaching position waiting for one thing." Sarah felt something tear inside her chest. They were talking about her like she wasn't there, like she was property to be collected and transported. "I can speak for myself, Thomas." Her father turned to her, and his expression softened slightly. "Of course you can, darling, and I want to hear everything about your ordeal. But first, let's get you somewhere warm and proper. We've taken rooms at the settlement hotel. We can talk there." "Father, Sarah." His tone brooked no argument. We've come a very long way in very difficult conditions to find you. The least you can do is allow us to ensure you're properly cared for." Jacob touched Sarah's arm lightly. When she looked at him, his eyes said what his mouth didn't, that she should go, that fighting this now wouldn't help anything, that they'd already judged the situation and made their decisions. "Give me a moment to gather my things," Sarah said quietly. She went back into the cabin on unsteady legs. Her father and brother stayed outside with the hired men, but their presence was heavy, intrusive. This place that had felt like a sanctuary now felt invaded, violated by the outside world's expectations and judgments. Sarah collected her belongings with shaking hands. The leather satchel that had survived the blizzard, her few clothes now dry and mended. She tucked the carved chest knife carefully into her pocket, hidden from view. When she turned to leave, Jacob was standing in the doorway. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for all of this, for what they must be thinking. You have nothing to apologize for. You saved my life." She wanted to say more, wanted to tell him everything she'd been feeling, but the moment was wrong, the privacy gone. "Thank you, Jacob, for everything." He nodded once, his face carefully neutral. But she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand clenched at his side. "Be safe, Sarah Hartwell." It sounded like goodbye. Final and absolute. Cornelius Hartwell helped his daughter mount the spare horse they'd brought, his hands gentle but possessive. Once she was settled, he approached Jacob one more time. "I meant what I said about compensation. We both know what people will say about my daughter spending weeks alone with a man. That kind of talk could ruin her prospects. If you'd like to help repair the damage, I'd be willing to pay significantly for your silence about the details of her stay here." Jacob stared at him. "You think I'd take money to lie about what happened? Nothing happened that would shame your daughter, and I won't pretend it did just to make you feel better about your own assumptions. See that you don't speak of this at all, then, for Sarah's sake." Hartwell's voice carried a veiled threat. "Men in my position have long memories and considerable reach, Mr. Brennan. It would be unfortunate if word spread about this incident." "Is that a threat?" "It's a statement of fact." Hartwell turned away, dismissing Jacob entirely. "Let's go. We have a long ride ahead." Sarah looked back once as they rode away. Jacob stood in front of his cabin, one hand raised in farewell, his face empty of expression. Then the trail curved, trees blocked her view, and he was gone. The ride down the mountain was silent. Sarah's father and brother rode on either side of her like guards, the hired men behind. No one spoke until they were well away from Jacob's cabin. Then Cornelius cleared his throat. "Sarah, I need to know the truth. Did that man harm you in any way?" "No, father. He was a perfect gentleman." "And you remained intact?" The word came with difficulty, wrapped in Victorian delicacy. Sarah felt heat rise in her face, anger mixing with embarrassment. "My virtue is intact, if that's what you're asking. Jacob Brennan saved my life and asked nothing in return. He deserves your thanks, not your suspicion." Thomas reached over and squeezed her hand. "We're just worried about you, Sarah. You have no idea how frightened we've been. When you didn't arrive at the settlement, when we heard about the blizzard, mother collapsed. She's been in bed for 2 weeks, sick with grief." The guilt hit Sarah like a physical blow. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "Of course you didn't. These things happen on the frontier." Her father's tone gentled slightly. "That's why we've made other arrangements." Sarah felt cold that had nothing to do with the weather. "What arrangements?" "Your mother and I have been discussing your future. This teaching position clearly isn't safe or suitable. We've arranged a match for you, Richard Thornton, the textile merchant. Do you remember him? Nice family, substantial holdings. He's willing to overlook this unfortunate incident, given the circumstances." "Father, no. It's already settled, Sarah. We'll return to Boston next week. The wedding will be in the spring." Sarah stared at her father, then at her brother, seeing in their faces the same implacable certainty, the same assumption that they knew what was best for her. They'd come all this way not to rescue her, but to reclaim her, to return her to the life she'd tried to escape. She reached into her pocket and felt the carved knight there, solid and real, Jacob's gift. A reminder that for a few weeks she'd lived differently, been someone different. "What if I refuse?" she asked quietly. Her father looked at her with something like pity. "Then you'll remain out here alone, with a ruined reputation and no prospects. Is that really what you want, Sarah? A life of hardship and poverty, with no family to support you?" She didn't answer. Because the terrible truth was that part of her did want exactly that. If it meant she could go back to that cabin, back to the man who'd looked at her like she mattered, like she was enough, exactly as she was. But the other part of her, the part raised on duty and obligation, knew her father was right. She couldn't stay. She had no means to support herself, no real claim on Jacob's affection beyond a few shared moments and one carved chess piece. So she rode on in silence, leaving the mountains behind, feeling something inside her chest crack and splinter with every step that took her farther from the life she'd briefly imagined and closer to the one that had been chosen for her. Behind them, in a cabin high in the Montana wilderness, Jacob Brennan stood at his window and watched the trail long after the riders had disappeared. Then he reached up, pulled the leather cord over his head, and held Emma's ring in his palm. "I think I finally understand," he said to the empty room, "what it means to want to live again, and how much it hurts when the world won't let you." He put the ring back on, but this time the weight of it felt different, not like an anchor, but like a question he didn't yet have the courage to answer. The settlement hotel was the finest building for 100 miles, which meant it had glass windows, a restaurant that served 3 meals a day, and rooms that didn't leak when it rained. Sarah's father had taken an entire floor, turning the place into a temporary Hartwell compound. Sarah spent the first 2 days in her room, claiming exhaustion. In truth, she couldn't bear the thought of sitting through formal dinners, making polite conversation, pretending everything was fine, when her entire world felt like it was crumbling. On the 3rd morning, Thomas knocked on her door. "May I come in?" Sarah pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "It's your father's money paying for the room. I suppose that gives you the right." Thomas winced at the bitterness in her voice, but entered anyway. He pulled a chair close to where she sat by the window and studied her face with concern. "You look terrible, Sarah." "Thank you. You always were charming." "I mean it. You haven't been sleeping." "Father's worried. Even I'm worried, and you know how self-absorbed I usually am." He reached out and took her hand. "Talk to me. Really talk to me. Not the polite conversation you've been giving, Father." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. Thomas was only 2 years older than her, and they'd been close as children before the weight of family expectations had pushed them into their assigned roles. Him as heir and businessman, her as decorative daughter and future society wife. "Do you remember when we were children?" she said quietly. "And we used to sneak out to the docks? We'd watch the ships come in from everywhere, China, Africa, the West Indies, and we'd make up stories about where we'd go when we grew up. I remember you wanted to sail to Egypt and see the pyramids, and you wanted to join the merchant marine and circumnavigate the globe." Sarah smiled sadly. "Instead, you're managing Father's warehouses, and I'm being married off to Richard Thornton, who's never been farther than New York." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Is this about the teaching position? Because Father's right, Sarah, it's not safe out here. What happened to you proves that. What happened to me was an accident. It could have happened anywhere. But it didn't happen anywhere. It happened here, in the middle of nowhere, with no one to help you except a stranger. Jacob's not a stranger. Not anymore." The words came out before she could stop them. Thomas leaned back, his expression shifting from concern to something more complicated. "Sarah, please tell me you haven't developed feelings for that mountain man." She didn't answer, which was answer enough. "Oh, Sarah." Thomas ran his hand through his hair. You barely know him. You spent a few weeks trapped in a cabin together during a crisis. That's not real. It's not a foundation for anything. How do you know? Have you ever spent time with someone when all the pretense and social performance was stripped away? When you could just be yourself without worrying about what anyone else thought? No, Thomas admitted, but I also haven't confused gratitude and proximity for love. Is that what you think this is? Sarah felt anger flare in her chest. You think I'm just some foolish girl who's mistaken her rescuer for a prince? I think you're scared. I think teaching out here was harder than you expected, and you were lonely, and then you nearly died, and a man was kind to you. Those are powerful things, Sarah, but they're not love. You're wrong. Am I? What do you actually know about him? What he wants, who he really is beyond the grief he's carrying? Did you talk about a future together? Did he ask you to stay? Sarah looked away, unable to answer, because Thomas was hitting too close to uncomfortable truths. Jacob hadn't asked her to stay. He'd let her go without a fight, had given her a chess piece and a quiet farewell, and nothing more. That's what I thought, Thomas said gently. Sarah, I'm not trying to be cruel. I just don't want you to throw away your life on a fantasy. What would you even do if you stayed? You have no money, no property, no means of supporting yourself. Father would cut you off completely, you know he would. You'd be dependent on a man you barely know, living in poverty in a one-room cabin, with winter lasting 6 months out of the year. That sounds like a reason to give me my inheritance now, not a reason to force me into a marriage I don't want. Thomas sighed. Father won't do that. You know he won't. He controls your trust until you're 30 or married, and he'll choose married every time, because at least then you'll be someone's responsibility. Someone's property, you mean? That's not fair. Richard Thornton is a good man. He'll treat you well. I don't love him. You'll learn to. Mother didn't love Father when they married, and look at them now. Sarah thought about her parents' marriage, proper, formal, founded on mutual respect and shared social standing. They were partners in the business of maintaining their position, raising their children, presenting a united front to the world. Was there love there? But it was nothing like what she'd felt in that cabin, playing chess by firelight, watching Jacob's face as he told her about Emma, feeling her heart skip when their hands touched. I don't want what Mother has, Sarah said. I want more than that. Then you'll be disappointed. Because life isn't fairy tales, Sarah. It's compromise and responsibility and making the best of what's available. Thomas stood. Father's arranged for us to leave in 3 days. The weather's clearing, and he wants to get back before more storms come. I suggest you spend that time accepting what's going to happen instead of fighting it. He left her alone with her thoughts and the view from her window, the mountains in the distance, sharp and white against the blue sky. Somewhere up there, Jacob was checking his traps, carving wood by his fire, living the life he'd chosen. Had he thought about her? Did he regret letting her go so easily? Or had she been just an interruption in his solitude, someone he'd been relieved to see leave? Sarah pulled the carved chess knight from her pocket and turned it over in her hands. It was beautifully made, the details precise, even in the small scale, the kind of thing that took time and care and attention. He'd made this during one of those long winter evenings, working while she read or mended, both of them comfortable in each other's presence. That had been real. She was certain of it. Over the next 2 days, Sarah moved through the motions of preparing for departure. She let her mother's lady's maid help her into proper dresses again, submitted to having her hair styled in fashionable arrangements, sat through dinners with her father and brother, where they discussed their route home and the wedding plans, as if she'd already agreed to everything. But at night, alone in her room, she took out the chess knight and a piece of paper and tried to write letters she could never send. Dear Jacob, she wrote, I know you're not a man who reads much beyond practical things, but I need to tell you. She crossed it out and started again. Jacob, I want you to know that our time together, no. I'm going back to Boston to marry a man I don't love because I don't have the courage. She crumpled that page and threw it in the fire. The truth was, she didn't know what to say. Because what could she say that would change anything? He hadn't asked her to stay. He hadn't suggested there could be a future for them. He'd let her father take her away without a word of protest. Maybe Thomas was right. Maybe she'd imagined a connection that was really just gratitude and loneliness and the intensity of shared crisis. Or maybe Jacob was just too wounded, too broken by his past, to risk his heart again. On the morning of their scheduled departure, Sarah was packing the last of her belongings when Thomas entered with an odd expression on his face. "Sarah, there's someone here to see you. A man from the trading post." Her heart leaped. "Jacob?" "No. An older man named Ezra. He says he has something for you." Sarah rushed downstairs to find Ezra standing awkwardly in the hotel lobby, his weather-beaten face looking distinctly uncomfortable in the refined setting. When he saw her, relief crossed his features. "Miss Hartwell, I'm glad I caught you before you left." "Ezra, is everything all right? Is Jacob?" "He's fine, but he asked me to give you this." Ezra pulled out a folded paper from inside his coat. "Made me promise to get it to you before you headed back east." Sarah took the paper with shaking hands. It was a map, hand-drawn with careful detail. She recognized it immediately, the trails around Jacob's cabin, the landmarks, the route down to the trading post. The same map he'd sketched for her weeks ago when teaching her about the mountains. But this time, there was writing at the bottom. Jacob's handwriting was rough but legible. "Sarah," it read, "this map shows the way back. If you ever need it, you'll always be welcome here. You were right about what Emma would want. She'd want me to live, not just exist. You showed me the difference." Sarah read it 3 times, her heart pounding. It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't even an invitation, not really. But it was something. An open door. A possibility. "Did he say anything else?" she asked Ezra. The old man shifted uncomfortably. "Said to tell you he understood if you didn't come back. Said he knew you had a life waiting for you, obligations. But he wanted you to know the door would be open, just in case." "Just in case," Sarah repeated softly. "He's a good man, Miss Hartwell. Stubborn as a mule and twice as ornery sometimes, but good. I've known him 5 years, and I've never seen him care about another soul the way I think he cares about you." Cornelius Hartwell's voice cut through the moment like a knife. "Sarah, the coach is ready. We need to leave now if we're going to make the next town by nightfall." Sarah looked at her father, then at Ezra, then down at the map in her hands. 3 days to Boston. 3 days until she'd be locked into a life she didn't want, with a man she didn't love. 3 days until this moment would be nothing but a memory, and the map in her hands would be worthless. Unless she chose differently. "Thank you, Ezra," she said quietly. "Thank you for bringing this to me." He nodded, tipped his hat, and left. Sarah stood in the hotel lobby, the map clutched in her hands, aware that everyone was waiting for her. Her father, Thomas, the servants, the coachman, all waiting for her to climb into that coach and ride away from the mountains and back to the life that had been chosen for her. She thought about Emma, buried on a hill overlooking a ranch, having never gotten to live the life she and Jacob had planned. She thought about her mother, trapped in a marriage of convenience, living a half-life of social obligation. She thought about herself at 60, looking back and wondering what might have happened if she'd been braver. Then Sarah Hartwell tucked the map carefully into her pocket next to the carved chess knight and made a decision that would change everything. Jacob swept Sarah up in his arms without another word and carried her to the cabin. He kicked the door shut behind them and set her gently near the fire, then immediately began stripping off her wet cloak and checking her for injuries. "You rode up here alone? In winter? Are you out of your mind?" His voice was rough with emotion, anger and fear and relief all tangled together. "You could have died, Sarah." You could have frozen, or fallen, or... But I didn't. Sarah caught his hands, stilling them. Jacob, stop. I'm fine. I'm here, and I'm fine. Your family, where are they? Did something happen? They're probably looking for me by now. I ran. She said it simply, matter-of-factly, and watched understanding dawn in his eyes. You ran away from your family. He sat back on his heels, staring at her. From the coach. From a life I didn't want. Toward one I do want. Sarah pulled the teaching certificate from her pocket, the one she'd kept safe through everything, and deliberately tore it in half. Then in half again. I don't need this anymore. Sarah, what are you doing? With a Bregvin with her. Making a choice, the choice I should have made days ago. She dropped the torn paper and took both his hands in hers. Jacob, I'm not some foolish girl who's confused gratitude with love. I'm not running from one prison into another. I know exactly what I'm doing. Do you? Because what you're doing is throwing away your family, your reputation, any security or support you had. For what? For me? A man who lives in a cabin in the middle of nowhere and has nothing to offer you? You're offering me yourself. That's everything. Jacob pulled away and stood, pacing the small space like a caged animal. You don't understand what you're saying. I have nothing, Sarah. No land, no prospects, no future beyond surviving one winter at a time. Your father was right, you'd be dependent on me completely, living in poverty, cut off from everyone and everything you've known. I know, and you'd be doing it for a man who's broken, who might never be whole again, whose heart is so damn tangled up with grief and guilt that he doesn't even know if he's capable of loving you the way you deserve. I know that too. Jacob stopped pacing and turned to face her. Then why are you here? Sarah stood, her legs steadier now, and crossed to where he stood. She reached up and touched his face, feeling the rough beard under her palm, seeing the fear and hope warring in his eyes. Because the last 2 weeks without you were the longest of my life. Because every time I looked at my brother, I saw my future, comfortable, proper, slowly dying inside. Because when I held your map and read your note, I realized that some risks are worth taking. She moved her hand to his chest, feeling his heart pound beneath her palm. Because I love you, Jacob Brennan, and I hope you love me too. He closed his eyes, his jaw working. When he opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. I never beat you at chess. You did. That night before you left, I let you think I won. But you had me in 4 moves. I just couldn't stand to end the game. He took her face in both his hands. Sarah, are you absolutely certain about this? Because once you make this choice, there's no going back. Your family will disown you. Society will shun you. And you'll be stuck with a stubborn mountain man who doesn't even have a proper house to offer you. This cabin is more of a home than I've ever had, and I don't need society or my father's approval. I just need you. She smiled up at him. But I do have conditions. Conditions? I'm still going to teach. The settlement school still needs someone, and I'm qualified. I'll ride down once a week, or they can send the children up here if that's easier. All right. What else? You're going to teach me how to survive up here properly. How to trap and fish and shoot. I won't be a burden or a decoration. I'll be a partner. Jacob's lips twitched into almost a smile. Anything else? Yes. Sarah pulled the carved chest knight from her other pocket and held it up between them. You're going to finish making this set, because we're going to have years of evenings to fill, and I plan to finally beat you, fair and square. Then Jacob was pulling her into his arms, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that was desperate and tender and full of promise. Sarah melted into him, her arms wrapping around his neck, everything else falling away until there was just this, just them, together, choosing each other against all reason and expectation. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. Your family's going to come for you. You know that, right? Your father isn't the type to just let this go. I know. When they come, we'll face them together." Sarah touched the leather cord at his neck, feeling Emma's ring beneath his shirt. "I'm not asking you to forget her, Jacob. I'm not asking you to stop loving her. I'm just asking you to make room for me too." Jacob pulled the cord over his head and held the ring in his palm, looking at it in the firelight. Then he carefully placed it in the wooden box where he kept his important things and closed the lid. "Emma would have liked you," he said quietly. "She would have told me I was a fool if I let you go. Then it's a good thing I didn't give you the choice." Sarah took his hand and laced their fingers together. "What happens now?" "Now," Jacob pulled her close again, "now we figure out how to build a life together, one day at a time." Outside, the sun had fully set, and the mountains were dark against the stars. Somewhere down those trails, men were probably searching for Sarah, but that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, they had this cabin, this fire, and each other. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. 2 weeks passed before Thomas came. He arrived alone on a clear morning, riding slowly up the trail like a man who wasn't entirely sure of his welcome. Jacob spotted him first and quietly warned Sarah, who was inside preparing lessons for the settlement children. "It's all right," she said, touching his arm. "I knew someone would come eventually." They waited together at the cabin door as Thomas dismounted. He looked tired, older than when Sarah had last seen him. His eyes went from his sister to Jacob and back again, taking in their joined hands, the way they stood together. "Sarah," his voice was careful, neutral, "may I speak with you? Anything you need to say, you can say in front of Jacob." Thomas nodded slowly, as if he'd expected this answer. "All right. Father sent me. He wanted to come himself, but Mother—" He paused, pain flickering across his face. "Mother had another collapse when you disappeared. She's been very ill." Sarah felt guilt stab through her. "Is she—" "She'll live. The doctor says she just needs rest and time to accept what's happened." Thomas looked down at his hands. "Father wanted me to bring you back. He authorized me to offer anything: money, a separate household, even permission to continue teaching if that's what you want. Just come home, Sarah. Please. This is my home now. Is it? Or is it just where you ran to?" Thomas's voice hardened. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The scandal you've created?" Father's had to make explanations to everyone. The Thorntons, our business partners, half of Boston society. "The story is that you suffered a head injury during your ordeal and aren't thinking clearly." How convenient. It was the kindest explanation we could offer. The alternative was admitting that you'd willingly destroyed your reputation to live in sin with a mountain man. Jacob's hand tightened on Sarah's, but he said nothing. "We're not living in sin," Sarah said quietly. "We were married 3 days ago. Ezra officiated at the trading post. It's legal and binding." Thomas stared at her. "You married him?" "I did. Without telling your family, without any of us present, without even sending word." His voice cracked slightly. "Sarah, how could you? Because if I'd waited, if I'd asked permission, Father would have found a way to stop it." "You know he would have." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled an envelope from inside his coat and held it out. "Father asked me to give you this. It's a letter. He says—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "He says, if you insist on this path, then you're no longer his daughter. He's removing you from his will. Your trust fund will be dissolved and distributed to charity. You'll have nothing from the family, no money, no support, no contact." Sarah took the envelope with shaking hands but didn't open it. "I see. Sarah, please, don't let pride destroy everything. You can still fix this. We can get the marriage annulled, claim it was done under duress. You can come home and—" "And what?" Live the life Father chose for me? Marry Richard Thornton and pretend to be happy while slowly suffocating? Sarah shook her head. I won't do it, Thomas. I can't. Even if it means losing your family? You're the one choosing to lose me. I'm not going anywhere. You know where to find me. She took a step forward. Thomas, I love you. You're my brother, and I'll always love you. But I love Jacob too, and I choose this life. I choose him. If Father can't accept that, then that's his decision, not mine. Thomas looked at Jacob for the first time. Jacob met his gaze steadily. I love her more than I thought I could love anyone again, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving to her that she didn't make a mistake choosing me. Can you provide for her? Give her any kind of decent life? I've got this cabin and enough skill to keep us fed and warm. Sarah's going to teach at the settlement school. She'll have an income of her own. It won't be luxury, but it'll be honest work and a life we build together. That's more than a lot of people have. Thomas studied them both, his expression troubled. Finally, he sighed. I think you're both fools, but I can see you're happy fools, which is more than I can say for most of the people I know. He turned back to Sarah. Mother wanted me to tell you something, she said. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. She said she understands. She said if she'd had your courage when she was young, her life might have been very different, and she said she loves you, even if she can't say so out loud anymore. Sarah felt tears spill down her cheeks. Tell her I love her too. Tell her I'm happy. Thomas nodded. He pulled out a leather pouch and held it out to Jacob. This isn't from Father. It's from me. Consider it a wedding gift, or an investment, or whatever you need to tell yourself to take it. There's enough there to buy some land if you want to expand beyond this cabin. Or to set aside for, he glanced at Sarah, for the future. Thomas, Sarah started. Don't argue with me. I can afford it. And I want to know my sister isn't going to starve if something happens. He managed a small smile. Besides, someone has to be the reasonable one in this family. They stood there awkwardly for a moment. Then Sarah stepped forward and hugged her brother tightly. Thomas held her for a long moment before pulling back and clearing his throat. I should go. I've got a long ride ahead. He mounted his horse, then looked down at them one more time. I will. They watched him ride away until he disappeared into the trees. Then Sarah turned to Jacob, who was holding the leather pouch with a bemused expression. Well, Mrs. Brennan, he said, testing out the name, looks like we're officially on our own. Not entirely. Sarah pulled out a piece of paper from her pocket, a letter from the settlement school board, offering her the teaching position with housing provided in town during the week if needed. We have options. We have each other. And we have this. She gestured to the mountains around them, the cabin behind them, the life they were building together. Jacob pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. Think you'll miss it, the fancy parties, the comfortable life. Not for a moment. Sarah looked up at him. Though I do expect you to finish that chess set, I'm determined to beat you properly before spring. Is that so? It is. And then I'm going to teach the settlement children to play, and you're going to help me. Jacob laughed, a sound that was becoming more frequent, easier. Yes, ma'am, whatever you say. They went inside together as the afternoon sun warmed the cabin walls. On the table, Jacob's carving tools waited next to a half-finished rook. In the corner, Sarah's teaching materials were stacked neatly beside her few belongings. The cabin was small, simple, but it was theirs. That evening, as they sat by the fire working on their separate projects, Sarah thought about the girl she'd been when she left Boston, full of determination and idealism, running towards something she couldn't quite name. And now here she was, in a cabin on a Montana mountain, married to a man who'd saved her life in more ways than one. Jacob, she said quietly. I'm happy, truly happy. He looked up from his carving and smiled, not the cautious, guarded expression he'd worn when they first met, but something open and warm and real. "So am I," he said. "So am I." Outside, the mountain stood eternal and unchanging. But inside the cabin, two people who'd been lost had found each other, and in finding each other, had found themselves. The fire crackled, the wind sang through the pines, and in the Montana wilderness a new life was beginning, built not on expectations or obligations, but on choice and courage and love. Sometimes the person who saves your life ends up saving so much more than that. They show you who you really are, who you could be, if you're brave enough to choose it. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they choose you right back. Sarah and Jacob Brennan had made their choice, and every day after, they chose each other again. It was enough. It was everything. It was home.